Back in my early 20s, I worked at a small radio station as the nighttime radio host. The station itself was in a small town, about an hour away from Las Vegas. KRT3 87.4 FM was our station name. Not particularly noteworthy or catchy sounding, but our signal only really served the small town surroundings, one side of Vegas, so it didn't need to stand out. Despite that fact, we had a small yet dedicated listener base, and played mostly old country songs. Some mornings, when I'd go to the local diner for breakfast after my shift, I'd talk with some of the old-timers that like to tune into my evening broadcast. They'd usually give me music suggestions or things to talk about for my next show. Needless to say, it was a great gig and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The pay was okay, but it honestly wasn't a lot of work, and it got me by while I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. That being said, though, there was one incident at that station that made me quit for good. And to this day, I still have zero idea as to what actually happened that night. So for context, our station was a small brick building, about a 30-minute drive outside of a very small town. Altogether, that population had to have been somewhere around, I'd say 600 people, so the community was very tight-knit. We were situated just off the main highway, and it wasn't unusual to see a few cars pass each night, but you never really saw any people whatsoever. And the land across from the station was just bare desert for miles and miles. And the same could be said for the surrounding land as well, with the exclusion of a few small mountain/foothill ranges. And of course, a Native American reservation approximately about 80 miles north of the station. Now, with the scene set, let me share with you one of the most horrifying nights I've ever had in my life. It was about, I'd say late August, probably around 6 p.m. I was an hour into my shift, and my coworker, who was the daytime host, had stayed a bit later with me so we could do a segment/debate about the local mayoral election coming up. Super boring stuff, I know, but our average listener base consisted of old farmers and ranchers who ate up the local politics. So we finished up and I segued into the first music block I had carved out for the night, along with my coworker to gather his things and get ready to go home. "Alright, got my keys, got my bag, should be everything," my coworker mumbled to himself. "Oh, and are you still okay to come in about an hour and a half earlier tomorrow to cover me? Sorry to have to do it to you, man, but my dog cannot miss her appointment at the vet. She's getting old, you know?" I never was able to sleep anyways, and the little bit of overtime would help me with some bills, so I had readily agreed. "Yeah, of course, man, don't worry about it. I'll be here for 3:30 p.m. sharp. Just don't forget, you owe me one." I jokingly jabbed back at him. Yeah, I won't forget. Anyway, I gotta run. I'll see you tomorrow, dude." My coworker replied back as he clumsily stumbled his way out of the door towards his car. With a slam of the door and a turn of the key, him and his car motored off back into town, leaving just me at the station. I had about 50 minutes left of the uninterrupted music block I started, so I decided to break out one of the books I had at my desk and then head to our small kitchen to put a pot of coffee on. I managed to get about 3 chapters of Death is a Lonely Business, and 2 cups of coffee down before it was time to interject with my weather update for the day. "Hey folks, it's another lovely evening here in town, with temperatures sitting around 91 degrees Fahrenheit as the sun is setting. Nothing but clear skies on the radar, so get out there and do some stargazing tonight. Anyways, coming up next we have another solid hour of nothing but solid gold country hits, starting off with a great one from Hank Williams. This one's for you, Ray." For context, Ray was one of the old-timers I talked to at the diner often. He had requested a certain album that morning, so of course I had to dig through all our vinyls to see if we still had it, which we did. As I dropped the needle onto the groove, I was startled by a sharp succession of knocks at the station door. It honestly caught me off guard, as nobody really ever shows up at the station, unless it's someone in dire need of help, or maybe my coworker turning around because he forgot something. I recalled an incident the year prior where a stranded motorist had shown up at the station at night, seeking help, and thought maybe this was the case again. So I got up as my next block of music started, and I went to peer through the peephole of the door to see who was there. There was a guy on the other side of the door, probably in his late teens or early 20s, I'd say. Slim build, average height, possibly Native American or Latino with dark black hair, dark brown eyes, and was wearing a tan plaid shirt with a pair of dirty jeans and well-worn cowboy boots. I decided to open the door to greet him, and truly caught sight of just how bad he looked. He was disheveled and looked exhausted with his eyes sunken back into his skull and beads of sweat pouring down his face. "Hey, man, are you alright? Do you need something?" I asked him. He looked back at me for what felt like almost entirely too long before replying in a low, almost hushed voice. My car broke down. You got a phone?" The station did indeed have a landline, so I brought him inside and led him to the phone. There's a directory book hanging on the wall beside the phone. Town's not too far from here, and I believe the service station offers towing services. Why don't you give him a call and I'll grab you some water, man? You don't look too good, I told the man as I went to the kitchen to get some water, and simultaneously make a fresh pot of coffee. He nodded, but didn't say a word. I returned down the hallway with a glass of water and found him sitting at my coworker's desk. His back was to me, sitting absolutely pin straight in the chair, with his arms resting on the chairs. "Here's the water, man. Were you able to get a hold of the folks at the service station?" I asked him as I set the water down on my desk in front of him. I received no reply to my question. Instead, he kept his gaze focused out the window, beside the front door. I went and sat in my chair across from him. Yet again, he remained silent, but picked up the water and drank it all down in one continuous motion before setting the glass back down on the desk. I found his lack of any real conversation a bit strange, but then again, I had no idea how long dude had been out there, exposed to the elements, especially since it could get up to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, and that kind of heat can kill you if you're not prepared. I thought he's probably just severely dehydrated and beyond exhausted. "How far away did your car break down?" I asked. He stared at me for what felt like an uncomfortably long time, before raising his fingers towards the east, and saying again in a hushed tone, "About 5 miles. He, looked like he walked about 500 miles to get here, not just 5. So I was a bit confused on how he looked as disheveled as he was. Nevertheless, I wasn't here to judge. "Hey, that ain't too bad. At least it wasn't 100 miles away. Kinda lucky you were close to here. Well, just sit tight for a bit, and I'm sure the tow truck will be along within the next hour or two. I've got some coffee brewing right now if you want some." Again, he didn't utter a word and just turned his head to stare out the window. The sun was starting to go down, casting a deep orange glow onto his face. I took it as a silent acknowledgement and jumped back to my reading for a bit. Neither of us moving from our positions for the next 30 minutes, and nobody uttering a single word in that time. Checking my watch, I saw I had about 10 minutes before introducing the next music block, so I got up to get more coffee. The guy was still staring at the window as I passed by. I'm not even sure if the dude blinked once in the time we spent sitting there. He just kept his head to the side, staring out the window. Grabbing 2 mugs, I poured us both some coffee, but being the klutz I am, I managed to spill mine. I spent a few minutes cleaning everything up before heading back out to my desk with mugs in hand. My coworker's chair was empty. I set the 1 mug I poured for the stranger down on the desk and looked around for him. Walking briefly to the hallway, I noticed the bathroom door shut and figured he was probably in there. I was a bit confused as I never heard anyone stand up and walk down the hall, but I didn't really give it a second thought. So I set my coffee down at my desk, dropped into my chair, and popped my headphones on just in time to interject my commentary before the next hour of music. KRT3 with yet another hour of uninterrupted music. Coming up next, starting off with a great album from the Charlie Daniels Band. But folks, before that, I'd just like to say that even though we're heading into the fall, make sure you and your vehicle are prepared to face the heat of the desert if you're headed out. It's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. Swapping out the last vinyl for the next while I gave my spiel, I put the needle down just as I finished my last sentence. Taking off my headphones, I picked up my book yet again and began reading, totally forgetting about the stranger who was still in the bathroom. It wasn't until 45 minutes later, after I finished my third coffee and really needed to piss, that I remember he was still in there. I half rushed down the hall and went to knock on the door with a, "Hey, sorry man, but..." when the door pushed open as soon as my hand met it. The bathroom was totally empty. The stranger was gone. Now, there were no windows in the bathroom. If you were to leave, you'd have to walk out of the bathroom straight down the hall and then turn left, right past my desk to go out the front door. So, if you left it at any point, he would have walked right past me as I was sitting there reading. And of course I was beyond puzzled at this, but I did still really have to pee. So I did my business. I washed up and came to the conclusion that maybe I was just mistaken. Maybe the tow truck had gotten here early and he left and I mistakenly thought he was in the bathroom. It still didn't explain how. I never heard anyone leave, though. Upon drying my hands off, I walked back out to my desk and then stopped dead in my tracks. When I rounded the corner, there at my co-worker's desk was the stranger, sitting in exactly the same way, still facing out the window as if he had never moved from the chair. I was very, very weirded out, but I like to consider myself a rational and level-headed person, and reasoned with myself that there had to be some sort of explanation for where this guy went. So I asked him, "Hey, man, I thought you left. Where did you go? Did the tow truck come by yet?" Nothing. Not a word from this guy. At this point, I was just wondering what the hell his problem is. I didn't want to come off as bigoted, but I thought that maybe he just didn't speak English very well. I mean, he didn't seem like a threat. He was just really fucking weird. I don't know. The kind of vibes I was getting from him were indescribable. Maybe he just went outside for some fresh air or something. It's pretty stuffy in here anyways. Not a big deal, I thought to myself. I was feeling a bit tired from not sleeping particularly well the previous day and just chalked things up to my brain jumping at shadows. I decided that another cup of coffee might be a good idea to regain some brain power. I grabbed my mug and noticed the stranger's mug was also empty. "I'm grabbing some more coffee. You want some, man?" I asked. "Yes." The reply came almost instantly, in a deeper voice this time, a stark contrast to the hushed tone he had used earlier. But I welcomed it, seeing as how he hadn't spoken a word to me since he initially showed up. So with both mugs in hand, I went back to the kitchen. I emptied out the old grounds and filter and replenished the water before loading the machine with more coffee grounds. I decided to make a full, fresh pot, seeing as how I'm tired, and obviously the stranger likes the coffee, even if he didn't say much to me. Upon flipping the switch to start the brewing process, I turned and head back to my desk, as it would soon be time for my next commentary and the next album. He was gone. Again. Now I know for a fact this time I didn't hear anybody get up and move around. No footsteps, no noises, no opening and closing of doors, nothing. Yet he just disappeared. I checked the bathroom. The door was wide open and empty. Nobody was in the studio at the desk. Nobody was under the desk. Hell, I even checked in the desk for some reason. Nothing. Nobody was in the kitchen, and nobody was in the storage room. That's the entire studio, and this stranger had just vanished. I walked back over to my desk and slumped into my chair, feeling half fearful and half bewildered. My My mind was now going in circles trying to figure out what the hell was going on here. I must have sat there going back and forth over possible scenarios for a good 5 minutes before I realized. The record I had playing ended, and it was time for commentary again. Still shaken, I picked up my headphones and tried to think of something to say. KRT3 here. We may be having a few technical issues here tonight, so I do apologize to any of our late night listeners. To make up for it, I have a special record up next. From one of my personal favorite artists, here's Waylon Jennings. As I changed out the vinyl, I was again startled by a sharp succession of knocks at the front door. Just as I dropped the needle, I scooted back with my chair and dropped my headphones on the desk, sitting and listening. We kept a .22 caliber rifle nearby in the storage room just in case. It was a small town in the desert with lots of farms and ranches around. Not uncommon for most people to own firearms. And without thinking, I made my way over to grab it. With rifle in hand, I grabbed a few bullets from the box of ammunition stored next to it and made my way to the front door. If this was a stranger out there at this point, I didn't care. Now I was looking out for myself. I peered out the peephole in the door and scanned what little of the surrounding area I could see. It took my eye a bit to adjust, but I could just barely make out a figure standing back away from the door. I could not tell who it was, though. Since the blinds on the window were still open, I carefully shuffled over to my left and leaned my head over to see out of it. At this point, it was fairly dark, and I couldn't see all too well with the faint glow cast by the two outside lights mounted on either side of the front door, but I could make out someone standing there, approximately 20 feet from the door. It shared the same height as the stranger, but I couldn't make out any discernible details. I strained my eyes to look a little harder when a giant thud hit the door. The sound was so violent and so unexpected that I screamed and fell back onto the floor. Still clutching the rifle, I brought it to my chest with one hand and used the other to slide myself backwards, pushing wildly with my legs until I was up against the wall. Though my hands were shaking hard, I raised the rifle to the door and shouted, "I have a gun! I don't know who the hell you are, but I need you to leave before I start shooting!" My warning, however, was unheeded, and the door shook again with a crashing thud. I kept my composure as best as I could and kept the rifles trained at the door, ready to start letting off rounds. It repeated about every 20 seconds. After I don't even know how many times the front door was hit, my adrenaline hit a peak and I squeezed the trigger. A single shot rang out and pierced through the door around chest level. I quickly cycled the bolt and let off another round, hitting the door again not far from where the first round hit. Then there was silence. As the ringing in my ears lessened, my heavy breathing slowed down a bit. I stood myself up and kept the rifle trained at the door, cycling the bolt for a new round just in case. I didn't want a chance opening the door and getting jumped by something or someone in case I missed, so I slowly worked my way over to the window where I could see if anything was sprawled out on the ground. When I was finally able to get a clear line of sight outside, I was horrified to see absolutely nothing. No person, no animal, nothing. My blood had run completely ice cold at this point. My rational brain had all but completely shut down, and I was now entirely submerged in fight or flight. The crashing noise started up again, but this time from the opposite side of the building. Like I mentioned earlier, the station was a brick building. The only possible way a noise of that magnitude would even be possible is if you took a pickup truck and hit the wall with it going at least 20 miles an hour. Something hit again, but from the roof this time. Again, the front door shook. At this point, I was turning in cycles, trying to decide where to point the gun next. It was like I was being surrounded, and boy, if I wasn't severely outnumbered. I slung the rifle on my back and made a quick dash down the hall to the storage room, turning and slamming the door once inside. Thankfully, this being a storage room, there was some decently heavy file cabinets along the wall. I managed to slide one in front of the door and block it off before turning and slumping myself down against the opposite wall, grabbing and pointing the rifle at the door at the same time. The loud thudding continued for some time before blending into what sounded like a symphony of fists knocking at every inch of the building. I was beyond frightened. I was trapped in this small room, and though I did have something to protect myself with, I didn't even know what I was up against. I had never experienced anything even remotely close to this in my life. I sat there with a rifle and listened as the symphony of knocks dwindled to just a single knock at the front door, before stopping altogether. Obviously, I didn't trust that whatever was out there was gone for good, so I waited about an hour, according to my watch, before even thinking of leaving the confines of the storage room. Pushing myself up off the laminate floor, all my muscles ached and my body felt heavy. Once my fight or flight wore off, I went back to being completely exhausted. No amount of caffeine could help me now, but I knew that even that I still had to keep my wits about me and stay vigilant. Even though I had only fired the gun twice, I grabbed another handful of bullets from the box and shoved them into my pocket with the others. Better safe than sorry is a great principle to live by. I stood in front of the door and took a couple deep breaths to steel myself. I just need to get to the phone. I can call the sheriff and get them to send everything they've got. It'll only take a minute. I can do this. With those thoughts in mind, I pushed aside the filing cabinet and readied my weapon. 1, 2, 3. I threw open the door and brought the rifle up to both my hands immediately. I could see across the bathroom. It was empty. Slowly working my way out, I appeared right towards the front door and then left the kitchen area. Everything was as it should be, nothing in disarray. The chair to my co-worker's desk was pushed in neatly. The kitchen still faintly smelled of coffee, but there was this weird heavy scent that hung thick in the air through the whole station. I hadn't noticed until after leaving the storage room. This might show my true age, but whatever. It's the best way I can describe it. Have you ever rolled your spare change into those wrappers so you could take them to the bank? After handling all those old pennies and quarters and whatnot, and your hands get this very distinct, earthy, coppery, metallic smell to them. That's precisely what it smelled like in there. The coppery smell of the eerie silence, only broken by the sound of the vinyl players, needle skipping over the record I'd put in on last. The whole station was fucked up, like I was on a set of some horror movie, but unlike those movies, with their quite frankly brand-dead protagonists, I only had one mission in mind, and that was to pick up the phone and call the sheriff, so I did. After assuring myself the place was indeed empty, I slung the rifle back over my shoulder and made my way into the kitchen. I grabbed the phone out the receiver and started wildly punching in the number for the sheriff's office. A small sense of relief was starting to wash over me as the dial tone started to sound, but that sense of relief didn't last long at all. Over the eerie quiet that had befallen the station, over the dial tone of the phone and the skipping of the record player, there was another noise. The sound of the front door's hinges, ever slowly opening. Through everything that had transpired that night, not once did it cross my mind to even lock the front door, and in that moment I had felt fear like I never felt it before. My heartbeat, which I could feel thumping so prominently within my chest, through everything had increased by so much, I could no longer feel it, and I'm sure my face must have been whiter than a fresh snowfall. I forgot all about the phone in my hand. I dropped it. I had zero grip strength left in me. Turning slowly around to face the front door, I saw the stranger was back. He stood back, face towards me in the open hallway, arms at his sides, unmoving. The sound of the dial tone went quiet. The skipping of the record player, however, kept a steady rhythm. The only thing that pierced the silence were the words the stranger spoke.
I need help.
Now about here is where things get foggy for me. After those events, the very next thing I remember is the deep orange glow of the morning sun beaming on my face and a firm hand on my shoulder. Dude, what the fuck are you doing out here? Are you okay? Are you hurt? What's going on? It was my coworker. Apparently when he rolled into the station for work that morning, he saw something out in the open desert across from the building. Now my coworker wore glasses and all around just genuinely had terrible vision, so he kind of just brushed it off because, well, he couldn't make out any discernible details, but after walking up to the now closed front door of the station, he noticed 2 perfect bullet holes right through it. He became intrigued and quickly went inside. I was gone. There was a cold cup of coffee on my desk, and the needle of the last vinyl I played was sitting off of the record, as if someone had taken the time to stop it from repeatedly skipping. He called out for me and checked every room of the station, becoming increasingly concerned when he couldn't find any trace of me anywhere, and found the rifle missing from the storage room. He turned outside and walked to the road, when he noticed the figure in the desert had moved closer, just barely being able to discern its features, now as human. He started to walk towards it, forming into a sprint once he got close enough to notice it was in fact me standing out there. And that's where I woke up. I was standing in the middle of the desert, arms laid at my side, back pinned straight, just staring out at the horizon. My coworker brought me back to the radio station and phoned the sheriff, telling him the state he found me in and about the bullet holes in the door. Apparently, the sheriff's station did get a call that night, but the operator hung up as there was nobody on the other end of the phone. I couldn't even speak for myself at this point. It was as if my mind had just completely broken, leaving me as a living, breathing shell of a human. Eventually, the sheriff and a couple of deputies did turn up, as well as an ambulance. Everyone tried to ask me questions about that night, and I knew I couldn't tell anyone what I witnessed. They would have just labeled me as crazy and locked me away in an institution or some shit. So with that little grip of sanity I could muster, I spun them a short tale about some crazed drifter that tried to assault me that night. Now obviously they were a bit dubious about my story, as there was no blood from any of the shots I fired, and no sign that anyone else had been there with me that night. Hell, I learned later on apparently there wasn't even a second coffee mug found, just the one that I used. But as they had no other evidence to go off of, that is the official explanation for what happened to me according to the law. I stayed in a local hospital for a couple of days so they could monitor me. The first day they loaded me up with Ativan, as I was still in somewhat of a state of shock and couldn't function, but ultimately I was released a few days later with a clean bill of health. I did briefly get a chance to speak with some of the locals I usually conversed with at the diner after the incident. They asked me how I was, and I reassured them that I would be fine. Ray, who was the one that specifically requested that Hank Williams album, would have been up late listening to my broadcast that night, so I asked him if anything seemed off about it, or if he noticed the dead air after I stopped playing the music. He told me he stayed up a bit later after the music I played for him, as he was working on installing some new parts for his farm truck that night, but that he didn't notice anything unusual. Now, nobody else I knew caught my broadcast after 8 p.m., so I still didn't exactly have an explanation for what happened that night. I remember years later learning about wendigos and skinwalkers and all the cryptids of the desert and the coppery blood smell usually associated with the first two entities, but ultimately I just don't know. I ended up moving to Canada a couple of years later and no longer have contact with anyone back home. And most of my family's dead, and I really just don't have a reason to go back there. Ever since I left, I haven't experienced anything like that in my life ever again. Some days I still wonder if the old radio station is still standing and if anyone else has seen the stranger. But as far as I know, I'm the only one to come across him. That night left me with a giant mental scar I'll never truly be able to forget. And if anyone has any ideas on what I might have come across that night, I would love to hear some suggestions, as I really don't have the faintest clue.